My daughter-in-law snatched the remote right out of my hand and said, "This is our living room. Now ask before you sit here." I didn't gasp. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned my head toward the kitchen where my son Arthur was pouring a glass of water. He heard every word. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second before he looked down at his feet, suddenly entirely fascinated by the hardwood floor. It was a Tuesday evening. I had been watching a cooking show in the armchair I bought with my late husband 20 years ago. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, had marched into the room, her phone pressed to her ear, and pulled the remote from my fingers without breaking her stride. She switched the TV to a loud reality show, tossed her designer bag onto the coffee table, and dropped onto the sofa. "You don't even like this room anyway," Elaine Jessica muttered, scrolling through her phone. "From now on, just knock or something. We need our own space to unwind after work." They had moved into my home 5 months ago to save for a down payment. I had cleared out the master bedroom for them, taking the smaller guest room downstairs. I paid the bills, bought the groceries, and stayed out of their way. Arthur finally walked into the living room carrying his water. He didn't look at me. He just sat next to his wife. I stood up. My knees popped slightly in the quiet room. I didn't demand an apology, and I didn't beg for my son to defend me. At 65, I knew that arguing with a wall only bruised your own knuckles. I walked quietly to my bedroom and shut the door. I sat on the edge of my mattress, looking around my small space. They wanted boundaries. They wanted ownership. It was time they learned exactly what ownership meant. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., just as I had every day for the last 4 decades. The house was dead quiet. I walked into the kitchen and made my coffee. The counters were sticky with whatever cocktail Jessica had mixed the night before. I wiped down only my small section of the island, leaving her mess exactly where it was. Then I walked to the entryway. Hanging on the little brass hook was the spare key to my second car, a reliable sedan. I rarely drove since retiring, which Jessica had commandeered for her daily commute. I took the key off the hook, walked back to my bedroom, and dropped it into my locked firebox. At 7:45 a.m., heavy footsteps hurried down the stairs. Arthur appeared in the kitchen, his tie half done. A moment later, Jessica stomped into the entryway. "Where are the keys?" she demanded, rummaging through the decorative bowl on the console table. "Arthur, did you move my keys?" "They aren't your keys." "Jessica." I observed smoothly from the kitchen island, taking a sip of my dark roast. She stopped and stared at me. Would I put the spare keys away? "I've decided to sell the sedan. You'll need to find your own transportation to work today." Arthur's eyes went wide. "Mom, she has a huge meeting at 9. Her office is 20 miles away. Then she should probably call a ride service immediately," I replied, turning a page of my morning newspaper. Jessica's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Are you doing this because of the TV last night? Seriously, Elaine? You're acting like a child." I lowered my paper and met her glare. "No, Jessica. I am acting like a homeowner managing her assets. The car is mine. The insurance is in my name. The free rides are over." She stood completely frozen, waiting for me to back down. When I didn't, she spun around and stormed out the front door to wait on the curb. 2 days later, the financial reality of their stay began to shift. When Arthur and Jessica first moved in, I added Arthur as an authorized user on one of my credit cards. It was strictly meant for household groceries. Recently, however, I noticed the bill ballooning. Exotic cheeses, imported wines, and expensive organic meal kits. Things I never ate were dominating the statements. On Thursday afternoon, I logged into my banking portal and permanently canceled that specific card. I was pulling a roast out of the oven when Arthur came home. He dropped a reusable grocery bag on the counter. It was entirely empty. "Mom, He began rubbing the back of his neck, a telltale sign of his anxiety. My card was declined at the checkout. It was incredibly embarrassing. The cashier had to void the whole transaction. "Did you freeze the account?" "I canceled it," I answered, setting the hot pan on the stove. "Why would you do that without telling me? How are we supposed to buy food?" I wiped my hands on a towel and pulled out the latest credit card statement from a kitchen drawer. I slid it across the counter. I had highlighted all of Jessica's luxury purchases in bright yellow. "You and your wife have been eating like royalty on my retirement income," I stated. "I agreed to help you save for a house, Arthur. I did not agree to fund your wife's gourmet lifestyle." Arthur stared at the yellow lines, his shoulders slumping. "She just likes nice things, Mom. It's been stressful for her living here. If living rent-free in my home is too stressful, she is welcome to leave," I countered evenly. "From now on, you buy your own groceries with your own money. You get the two bottom shelves of the refrigerator and the left pantry cabinet. Do not touch my food." He opened his mouth to argue, but the hard look in my eyes stopped him. He quietly folded the statement and walked upstairs. Saturday morning brought a new test of boundaries. I returned home from my weekly book club to find the door to my downstairs study wide open. My sewing machine and my favorite reading chair had been shoved into the dark hallway. In their place, directly in the center of my study, sat an expensive, bulky, indoor cycling bike and a rack of neon dumbbells. Jessica walked out of the kitchen, wiping her face with a towel. "Oh, good. You're back." She smiled tightly. "I needed a dedicated workout space. Since you just used that room to read, I figured you wouldn't mind. I moved your stuff out." She walked upstairs before I could even reply. I stood in the hallway looking at my sewing machine. A hot flash of anger hit my chest, but I pushed it down. Action, not emotion, was my weapon. I went to the garage and retrieved my heavy-duty moving dolly. It took me 45 minutes, moving slowly to protect my back, to tilt the heavy cycling bike onto the dolly. I wheeled it out of my study down the hall and pushed it straight out the back door onto the uncovered patio. I carried the dumbbells out next. Then I rolled my chair and sewing machine back into the study. I drove to the local hardware store, purchased a solid brass padlock and a latch, and installed them on the outside of the study door. When Jessica came downstairs looking for her afternoon workout, she stopped dead in the hallway. She rattled the padlock, then noticed her expensive bike sitting outside a light drizzle just beginning to fall from the gray sky. "Arthur!" She shrieked up the stairs. I stepped out of the kitchen holding a cup of tea. "Your equipment is outside," I informed her. "If you ever touch my belongings again, it goes to the curb." She glared at me, her fists clenched, but I just took a slow sip of my tea. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife, but I maintained my routine. I didn't avoid the common areas, and I didn't stay locked in my room. I simply lived in my house. On a Friday evening, I walked into the dining room to find the large oak table beautifully set for 6. Expensive candles were lit, and my best crystal glasses, the ones I kept in the china cabinet, were placed at every setting. Jessica was frantic in the kitchen, pulling trays out of the oven. "What is the occasion?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't look at me. "My department heads are coming over for dinner. We're pitching a new project. I need the house to be perfect." She finally stopped and pointed to a plastic container on the counter. "I left some leftover pasta in there for you. If you wouldn't mind staying in your room tonight, it would really help. We need a professional atmosphere." I looked at the plastic container, then at my beautiful dining table. "I will not be eating in my bedroom," I replied flatly. She spun around. "Elaine, please. This is for my career. You can't be out here making small talk in your cardigan while we discuss business. This is my home, Jessica. I eat at my dining table every night at 7 o'clock. I opened the refrigerator, took out a fresh salmon fillet, and began preparing my dinner. When her guests arrived 30 minutes later, they were charming and polite. I greeted them warmly dressed in a nice blouse. I sat exactly where I always sat, at the head of the table. I ate my salmon, contributed politely to the conversation when appropriate, and ignored Jessica's furious, panicked expressions. By the end of the night, her boss had complimented my cooking and my home. Jessica had to grit her teeth and smile. I didn't ruin her dinner. I just refused to be erased from it. Jessica worked from home 3 days a week, heavily relying on my high-speed internet to stream background shows and conduct video calls. I paid $120 a month for the premium fiber optic package. I didn't mind when things were peaceful, but peace was no longer on the menu. On a Tuesday afternoon, while Jessica was upstairs, I sat at my computer and logged into the router settings. I changed the network name and the password. I then went into the basement and unplugged the signal booster that pushed the Wi-Fi upstairs, taking it back to my bedroom. 10 minutes later, I heard the heavy footsteps. Jessica appeared in the living room holding her laptop. Did the internet go down? My presentation just dropped. The internet is fine. I noted, flipping a page of my book. The network isn't showing up. Did you reset the router? I changed the password. She stared at me, her jaw dropping. Why would you do that? I'm working. You are working for your company, earning your salary on my utility bill, I explained calmly. Since you and Arthur are functioning as independent adults in this house, you'll need to set up your own internet service provider or use your phone's mobile hotspot. I have a video conference in 5 minutes, she yelled, losing her composure entirely. Then I suggest you figure out your hotspot quickly, I replied, not looking up from my book. She stomped her foot like a toddler and ran back upstairs. Later that evening, Arthur tried to approach me about it, offering to pay half the internet bill. No, I declined. I don't want to split utilities. I want total control over what belongs to me. You can call the cable company tomorrow. For the next week, they had to sit in the freezing garage to catch the neighbor's guest Wi-Fi just to stream a movie. With their funds tightening and their comforts disappearing, Arthur and Jessica became masters of passive aggression. Doors were slammed, dishes were left in the sink. Their favorite tactic was the thermostat. It was November and the chill was settling into the walls. I preferred the house at a crisp 68 degrees, wearing a sweater to stay comfortable. Jessica, however, liked the house at a tropical 76 degrees. Every time I walked past the hallway, I'd hear the furnace roaring. The heat bill was going to double. Instead of playing a daily game of thermostat tug of war, I drove to the hardware store again. I purchased a clear locking thermostat guard, the kind they use in public libraries and offices. I installed it while they were at work. I set the temperature to a steady 68 degrees, locked the clear plastic box, and put the only tiny key on my personal keychain. That evening, I heard the click of the plastic box being pulled. Then, a frustrated sigh. Jessica shouted from the hallway. She locked the thermostat. She put a cage over it. Arthur came down the stairs looking absolutely exhausted. He jiggled the plastic box. Mom, seriously? I walked out of the kitchen. The heating bill was $300 last month, Arthur. I am on a fixed income. We're freezing upstairs, Jessica snapped. There are extra blankets in the linen closet. Or, since you're saving so much money on rent, you could buy a space heater. This is ridiculous. You're treating us like prisoners in our own home. Correction. I smiled, a cold, polite expression. I am treating you like tenants in my home. Tenants who do not pay rent. I turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving them standing in the chilly hallway. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had completely inverted. Sunday morning was the breaking point. I was sitting at the kitchen island drinking my coffee when Arthur and Jessica marched down the stairs. They looked united, their faces set in grim determination. They had clearly rehearsed this. "We need to talk," Arthur stated, pulling out a stool for his wife. I closed my book and folded my hands on the granite counter. "Go ahead." Jessica leaned forward. "You are making this living situation impossible, Elaine. You've taken the car, cut off the groceries, locked the internet, and now we're freezing. We are trying to build a future, and you are actively sabotaging us out of spite because of one silly argument over a TV remote. It was never about the remote," I clarified quietly. "It was about the entitlement." "We're your family," Arthur pleaded. "You're supposed to help us." I reached under the counter and pulled out a thick black leather binder. I opened it and pushed it toward them. "This is a ledger," I explained. "Since you moved in 6 months ago, I have tracked everything. The increase in electricity, the water bill, the premium cable. You demanded the groceries, the extra car insurance." Arthur looked down at the neatly typed spreadsheet. "You have cost me exactly $6,420 in additional living expenses," I continued. "Meanwhile, you have managed to save almost nothing for your down payment, because Jessica buys designer clothes, and you buy golf clubs." Jessica's face went pale. "You went through our mail." "No, I just pay attention to what comes into my house," I countered. "You want to be treated like adults building a future? Then look at the math. You aren't building a future. You are bleeding my present." The room fell entirely silent. Arthur stared at the final number at the bottom of the page, the color draining from his cheeks. The reality of their free ride was sitting right in front of them in black and white. Arthur rubbed his eyes. "Okay. We'll do better, Mom. We'll start paying you a few hundred a month for rent. Just unlock the thermostat and give us the Wi-Fi back." I looked at my son, 30 years old, yet still asking his mother to make his life softer. If I gave in now, nothing would ever truly change. The disrespect would creep back in disguised as family obligation. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a crisp white envelope, and laid it on top of the ledger. "What is this?" Jessica asked, her voice tight with sudden suspicion. "It is a 30-day notice to vacate," I stated clearly. Arthur physically recoiled. "You're kicking us out." "Mom, you can't do that. I am the sole owner of this property." "I absolutely can," I replied. "I wrote it on my personal stationery. It gives you exactly 30 days to find an apartment and move your belongings out of my house." Jessica stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "We don't have enough for a deposit. Where are we supposed to go? You both make good salaries. You will have to figure it out," I said, my voice unwavering. "I opened my home to help you. Instead, you tried to take it over. You told me I had to ask permission to sit in my own living room. You told me I didn't fit in." I stood up, taking my coffee mug. "You have 30 days, Arthur. Use them wisely." I walked away, leaving the envelope on the counter. There was no screaming match, no shattered plates, just the heavy, crushing weight of consequences finally catching up to them. Over the next 4 weeks, they scrambled. The passive aggression vanished, replaced by desperate, quiet panic. I didn't lift a finger to help them pack. Moving day arrived on a cold Tuesday morning. A rented box truck sat in my driveway. I stood on the front porch, arms crossed against the morning chill, watching Arthur load the last of their boxes. Jessica was already sitting in the passenger seat of the truck, staring straight ahead, refusing to look at me or say goodbye. Arthur closed the back of the truck and pulled down the rolling door. He walked over to the porch, his shoulders slumped. He looked older than he had 6 months ago. We got everything he said, quietly handing me the single house key I had originally given him. "Thank you." I accepted the key, dropping it into my pocket. He hesitated, shifting his weight. I know things got out of hand, Mom. I should have spoken up. About the remote. About a lot of things. You should have, I agreed, softly. But this was a lesson you both needed to learn. A marriage needs its own roof, Arthur. And I need my peace. He nodded slowly. Can I call you next week? I'd like that. He turned and walked to the truck. I watched them drive away, the rumble of the engine fading down the street until my driveway was completely empty. I stepped back inside and locked the deadbolt. The click echoed in the hallway. The house was incredibly beautifully silent. I walked into the living room, picked up the television remote, and placed it perfectly in the center of the coffee table. I sat down in my favorite armchair, pulled a warm blanket over my lap, and exhaled. I didn't need to fight to be respected. I just needed to remember who held the keys. My home was mine again, and the peace was worth every single uncomfortable moment.